Welcome back to the channel, folks. I'm Vulkan, and today we're taking a look at one of my favorite features for Torchlight Infinite, and that's going to be the build variety. So this game takes the skill gem system from PoE and adds sort of this like Torchlight twist to it. It makes it less RNG, a little bit easier to approach. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at a single build today, which is going to be the Flame Jet Frostfire. Now, I do have two other build videos I'm going to create to show off some other ways you can build your character, but for today, we're going to focus on this one. Now, I do want to clarify a few things and do a little bit of housekeeping before we get into this. So one, these are extremely top-end builds. They were provided to me by the devs during the playtest to help show kind of end-game content. So this is pretty optimized gear and it's at max level. But before we get into the build overview, I wanted to give a quick impression of the game so far. So first off, Torchlight Infinite is a free-to-play PC and mobile game coming to open beta this October. Now, the game takes place 200 years after Torchlight 2 and is a direct successor to that game. Now, in terms of progression, your profiles are shared between platforms, so you can swap between mobile and PC to play the same character, and that's super nice, being able to take the game with you. Now, in terms of gameplay, Torchlight Infinite is a true loot-based action RPG, just like the other games before it. Now, the combat is fast, chaotic, it's fun, there are some wild skills and combos you can string together. Each class has their own identity and traits to help bring some personality to the table when you're deciding who you want to play as. Now, that's one thing to keep in mind, these characters are locked entirely. There isn't a character creator or anything like that. Now, most of my time was spent on the Time Witness, Frostfire, and the Berserker, because I really wanted to get a well-rounded approach to ranged and melee combat, so I figured, you know what, let's just grab a few and see how they work out. Now, if you've seen my previous videos, you know that I'm a huge fan of the Time Witness and the way that class plays. It has a super fun mechanic that creates a clone, and if you stand in its AoE, you get special buffs. It does add a little wrinkle to movement, but it comes with a really big payoff. Now, the Frostfire, which is the build we're jumping in today, is more of a classic caster. You get huge damage and ailments from fire spells, but you can also harness the power of cold to help control mobs much easier. Now, her hero trait fluctuates between fire and cold depending on what skills you're casting, and they'll unleash an AoE blast that matches that damage element. So if you use more fire, you're gonna get a fire AoE. Use more cold, you're gonna get a frost AoE. Then we have the Berserker. Now, this is a class that I did enjoy, but it felt really underpowered early on. You have some really good cleave and survivability, but things took much longer to kill than the previous two classes I just mentioned. You do have the classic rage mechanic that gives you increased attack speed as well, but just understand the Berserker is more of a tank early on and not necessarily a DPS juggernaut. Now, beyond the classes and combat, I wanted to take a second to talk about the experience. So as a fan of Torchlight, Grim Dawn, Diablo, Titan Quest, all of these games have something in common. They deliver a strong action RPG experience where you start off with nothing and you work your way up to being an absolute monster of a character. But recently, games have been missing the mark. You have Wolcen, which has somewhat improved itself, but overall, it has been a disappointment. Then you have Diablo Immortal, which has some good gameplay for a mobile game, but it's extremely diluted by the horrible monetization that keeps players from actually enjoying the game. So Torchlight Infinite is closer to the games that helped make a mark on the genre, in my opinion. I've taken 3 classes to max level, I've played endgame, I've done everything in between. I was able to grind out legendaries, adjust my build, invest into my character, I was able to clear content, and not once did I feel like I was being held back or hamstrung while playing the game. So to me, that's a big win in 2022. But there are 2 more things I want to cover before we get into the build guide: the trading house and the cash shop. So recently, Torchlight Infinite posted a lengthy article on their trade house, which is where players will be able to buy and sell items using an in-game currency. Now, this is completely free. It's not a real money transaction house, so that is a huge win. Players can take legendaries, put them up for sale, so other players can purchase them for their build, and there is no third-party site needed. Now, the last thing I want to discuss is the free-to-play aspect. So this game will have things you can buy in the cash shop. You have stash tabs, you have talent resets, you have costumes. Now, in a previous video, I did discuss that the game has a gacha mechanic for pets where they provide small stat bonuses. Now, compared to Diablo Immortal, I am much happier with how this game is turning out because all of the gameplay and end-game content is available and it doesn't require any money spent or any currency or items to access it. I can play deep into the end game and grind for upgrades rather than needing something to actually do the content. Okay, so let's jump into the build. So this build focuses on the Flame Jet skill as its primary damage dealer. Now this skill is going to create a fire AoE that'll deal damage, and then it'll also emit projectiles that'll deal damage to anything around it. Now Flame Jet also gains something called Terra Charges. These are exclusive to AoE skills, and these will build over time, and then once you consume them, the Flame Jet will emit an extra projectile. It works really well at map clear. This does struggle against bosses, as most AoE builds typically do, but this one is fantastic for just blowing away big groups of enemies. So starting with that Flame Jet skill, let's talk about our support skills. So we have Fire Explosion, Fire Piercing, Speed Up Formation, Added Fire Damage, and Extra Ignite. So Extra Ignite will do as it says. It'll grant an additional chance for Flame Jet to ignite enemies, which then causes 3% of the original damage to tick every 2 seconds. Now Speed Up Formation is going to help you gain Terra Charges faster, which means more projectiles overall. We have Fire Pierce, which again is just fire resistance penetration for the skill. Then Fire Explosion is going to increase your fire damage and give extra ignite chance. And then lastly, we have Added Fire Damage, which just increases your fire damage. Very simple, very flat, straightforward. Next up, we have Soul Eating Circle. So this skill is going to create an AoE around your character, and then you're going to gain spell damage for each enemy that enters the circle for the first time. And this can stack. So if you have a ton of enemies going into that circle for the first time, it's a pretty big circle, then you're going to get a big chunk of bonuses. And if you kill enemies while they're in the circle, then you gain additional bonuses. So this is just one of those huge damage increase skills. You also gain increased Spell Pierce while the circle is up. So again, this is just a huge damage boost, and you should be using it as often as you possibly can. Now, in terms of support skills, we have Overclock, Soul Focus, and Extended Duration. Overclock, this is going to increase all outgoing damage for other skills while the Soul Eating Circle is up. So this just helps your Flame Jet, for instance. You're going to be blasting stuff away. We have Soul Focus, which will give other skills increased duration while the circle is up. This is great for our defensive buffer skill, which we'll talk about here in a moment. And then we have Extended Duration, which will increase the duration of the circle itself, which again is great because that allows us to get more bonuses and also increase the damage and duration of anything else because our circle will be up for a longer period of time. So then we have Shadow Dash. Now Shadow Dash is our mobility skill. It's going to allow us to blink a short distance and apply slow to any enemies along that path, which again helps with crowd control and to escape situations, since remember, we are a caster, we are pretty squishy, distance is our friend. Now this one does have only one support skill, and that's cooldown reduction, which reduces the cooldown of the skill. Pretty straightforward. Now, the next two skills we're going to be talking about are survivability based. We have defensive buffer, which I just mentioned, and we have our healing skill. So defensive buffer is going to reduce the physical and elemental damage taken during the skill's duration. Because this game can get super hectic at end game, and if you don't build properly, including your defenses, then you can get one shot super easily. Now, this helps smooth that damage intake out, right? And help protect you from spike damage. Defensive buffer is just going to really kind of give you a little extra survivability and a little extra toughness. So here we do have extended duration and cooldown reduction. So those we already know about, but we do have a new support skill called Iron Fortification, whose text is currently bugged. So we're not entirely sure what this one does at this point in time. I'm assuming it increases the amount of elemental damage absorbed or physical damage absorbed. And then we have our healing skill, which is Life Source. So in Torchlight Infinite, there are a few healing skills to choose from. You don't have like a potion, right? You look at Diablo, you look at Grim Dawn, those you have potions that'll be on a cooldown, or you'll have a certain quantity of them. In Torchlight Infinite, you don't have that. Instead, you have to slot a healing skill. And you can completely forego a healing skill if you want to. You don't have to have one. So some of these are a super slow regen. It ultimately heals more, but at a slower rate. Or you can get an instant health gain skill, but it's for a lesser amount. Now, in terms of the support skills for a Life Source, which is an instant heal skill, we again see cooldown reduction, but we have another new one called Berserk. Now, this is interesting, right? So Berserk is going to reduce the amount of healing we receive, but it's going to grant us increased attack and spell critical strike as a trade-off. Now, this is going to be super useful if you need an extra boost in damage, which we don't really need, to be honest with you. But you can also take it out if you need extra healing. So you can take that Berserk support skill, unslot it, and then get extra healing from your ability. It really just kind of lends to the flexibility that this system has, which is great. So those are all of our active skills. Now the next thing I want to talk about is our passive skills, and we're going to check out what we have running to take this build to the next level. So first up, we have Curse on Hit. So this is going to trigger any linked curses whenever your main skill, in this case Flame Jet, hits an enemy. So in this case, we have Restrain and we have Scorch. Now Scorch is going to cause enemies to take increased fire damage and have a higher chance at igniting, whereas Restrain is actually just going to reduce the amount of sealed mana that we're using. So sealed mana is just another term for reserved mana. All your passive skills will reserve various amounts of mana, so you need to be careful that you don't reserve everything and you can't cast your skills anymore, because it's entirely possible to reserve 99% of your mana, and then at that point you can't cast any skills, so you have to balance, right? So Restrain is a great support skill because it helps you really kind of maximize these passive skills and what you can equip. Now our second and final active passive is called Elemental Amplification. Now this gives us a huge boost to all elemental spell damage. Again, we have Restrain to help reduce that amount of sealed mana, but then we also have things as Stand as One and Selfishness. So Stand as One is going to increase the effect of all auras while this aura is active. This just gives us more oomph for elemental amplification. And then lastly, we have Selfishness, which again gives us a huge increase to our aura effect, further increasing the benefit of elemental amplification. Now this whole wheel just gives us massive boosts to our damage to help blow through maps and bosses. So those are our skills, but honestly, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to building in Torchlight Infinite. We also have talents and gear that we need to discuss as well. Now talents are nice passive boosts that'll help round out our build and also help with damage and survivability. Now we have 24 different trees to choose from, and you can choose up to 3 to specialize in. So the ones that they took for this build are God of Might, Warlord, and the Brave. So we're going to go in reverse here, starting with the Brave, because this is the last tree that they selected. So we take increased armor, life, and fire resist right out of the gate on this one. Then we're going to pick up Tenacity Blessing, which is going to increase the effectiveness of our defensive buffer skill, giving us even more defensive survivability. Now, mostly this tree is all survivability, really to help us stay alive longer, right? So you look through and it's like life, armor, fire resist, other resist, life regen. So it's all stuff that's going to help us stay alive for a longer period of time. And at certain milestones and talent trees, you're going to unlock major passive bonuses, and you can choose between 3. You get to choose one of 3 options. Now here we chose a couple. So for our majors, we took Resolve, which is going to further increase our Tenacity Blessing, which is going to give us even more survivability. And then we took Armoring as our second, which converts 50% of elemental damage taken into physical and gives us a chance to gain double armor, further reducing that physical damage taken. So as you can see, the Brave is just full on survivability. There isn't a lot of DPS stuff here, but that's why we also spec'd into Warlord. So Warlord is when things start to shift over to some big damage gains. We see some huge fire, ignite chance, and AoE damage increases. We also get a little bit more armor and life boost along with Tenacity Blessing. And then we have a node at the very end that gives us a damage increase for each point of strength, which increases the value of that stat for us, which is really, really important. So we can get some extra bumps from strength on our gear and our nodes, which is super nice because a lot of things come with strength, especially if you're trying to increase your fire damage. It seems fire and strength kind of go together in Torchlight Infinite. So if you can benefit from increasing fire damage per point of strength, then you're going to essentially double dip, which is going to be great. Now the major passives we took here are Sweep, which gives a chance for our AoE skills to deal double damage, and for each enemy we kill, our AoE range increases. Then we took Focused Blow, which gives us extra damage to enemies at the center of our AoE. So now you can see how Flame Jet is just getting these massive bonuses from everywhere. The center of our AoE is going to deal more damage, we're emitting more projectiles, everything's going to catch on fire, we're going to be dealing huge amounts of damage and just all over the place. So Flame Jet is just it's just going Super Saiyan, and I absolutely love it. And then lastly, we have Might. So Might, this tree is usually for strength and fire builds for melee characters. But since we get boosts from strength and fire, like I mentioned earlier, this makes for a really, really good starting tree. We get to see some more fire damage here, along with some cast speed, ignite, armor, and an extra 20% fire damage on the main skill every few seconds. So every few seconds, when we use our Flame Jet, we're going to get a 20% fire damage increase. Now for our major passive nodes, we took Burnout, which gives extra fire damage, but it also gives fire resistance to enemies for 1 second after a severe injury, which is a crit. And then we took Extreme Power, which gives us 1% increased damage for every 3 strength up to 200%. So those are our talents, but we do have one last thing to talk about, and that's gear. So for this very last section, we're going to talk about some of the key stats we need to look for on our armor and our weapons. So there's 4 main ones we need to look for here, and then other secondary stats are just going to help us. So what we want to look for is increased skill level, which is going to help push our skill level beyond 20 in order to continue boosting those stats, because as you upgrade your skill, 20 is the cap. So you can go through, get extra skill level up to 22, 23, 24. Then we want to take increased AoE damage, increased fire, spell, and elemental damage, and then armor and resistances for toughness, because again, we're a caster. We want to make sure that we can survive that spike damage. So guys, overall, this build has been extremely fun, and it really shows off how versatile and crazy you can get with compounding bonuses around a skill that you really, really like. So next up, we're going to cover some other builds like Spin to Win and an erosion-based build that takes advantage of Shadow Swamp and Shadow Shot. So that wraps this one up, everybody. If you like Torchlight Infinite and want more content, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.